Welcome back to our series of educational videos covering inflation and deflation. In this video, we will look at an overview of some historical examples of deflation, mostly in the US, but also one situation abroad. We will also see situations where deflation has not hurt the nation's economy, and cases where it has been absolutely deadly. We assume here that you have a basic understanding of what inflation and deflation are. If you feel like you would like some additional background, you may refer to our first video, which is linked in the description. In the United States, deflation has largely fallen into three broad categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. In the good cases, mild deflation occurred during the same periods as robust economic growth. One example of this was at the end of the 19th century. We had an economic boom in the form of the Second Industrial Age and the proliferation of railroads. At the same time, though, deflation occurred, which hurt debtors' and farmers' real incomes, which led to the populist movement. Another case of non-harmful deflation was the Roaring Twenties. Recovery after the First World War and the growth of the new high-tech industries caused prices to fall, while the economy grew. We have also had some instances of bad deflation in the United States. One case in the distant past was a period of deflation coinciding with financial crises between 1837 and 1843. It is unclear as to whether these issues were related to the bank war between President Jackson and the president of the U.S. National Bank, or instead were the result of a series of bad harvests in Europe dragging down the global economy. Another case of bad deflation occurred just a few years ago, following the financial meltdown of 2008. As toxic mortgage assets led bank after bank to fail, a general loss of confidence in our investment system led to widespread reductions in loans. Though the period of deflation and recession was short, it had a brutal effect on employment, and has forced the Federal Reserve to continue employing drastic measures to prevent the catastrophe from growing. Finally, we turn to the period of the United States history where we see ugly deflation, the Great Depression. As the U.S. stock markets began to collapse in the late 1929, public confidence in the economy fell as well. There was a heavy cut in consumer investment and purchases, as often occurs in such situations. At this point, deflation began, which led to a spiral as rational expectations set in. Anticipating further deflation, people began to further reduce spending while pulling money out of banks in order to hoard against continuing falling prices. These issues spread to the rest of the world due to an adherence to the gold standard. The gold standard meant that all currency was tied to the promise of a specific amount of gold. As the US tried to counter its deflation by pumping up interest rates, money flowed into the US markets from abroad. Those countries lost their gold as part of this, which forced them to decrease their money supply, spreading deflation. This global collapse led to more than a decade of damaged economies, highlighting some of the massive damage unchecked deflation can cause. We now turn our attention to a serious instance of historical deflation in the rest of the world. Deflation was absolutely devastating to the Weimar Republic, the German state that existed after World War I. In the wake of the war, the German economy experienced a major deflationary collapse. Banks were short of money due to the German need to pay off heavy reparations, meaning businesses had trouble getting cash to pay workers. This led, once again, to the loss of confidence in the economy, which leads into a deflationary spiral. What made this case particularly bad, however, was the way Germany handled the issue. Germany attempted to print large quantities of German marks in hopes of stimulating cash flow. However, this did not serve its intended purpose. People continued to hoard cash. The increase in the supply of money didn't reach the economy, and thus didn't help bring prices back under control. Deflation continued to occur. Germany had no choice but to keep printing money faster and faster until a turning point was reached. At that turning point, people realized that the money they were hoarding was going to very quickly become disvalued due to the massively increased money supply. They suddenly all attempted to liquidate their cash and purchase real goods. This immediately created a situation of hyperinflation. In just a few short years, the currency went from being worth 90 paper marks per US dollar to 4 trillion paper marks per dollar. Eventually, the process was ended by completely replacing the currency with a new one, but the damage had already been done. Some argue that the most extreme long-term consequence of this hyperinflation was the rise of National Socialism and Hitler. Here we have examined some of the cases of deflation in the last 2 centuries, and seen that its results can vary. In some situations, deflation has not been a major problem, and the economy has grown in spite of it. In other situations, however, rational expectations of deflation have led to even worse outcomes. For this reason, governments and economists are always cautious about deflation, keeping an eye on situations where it can begin to grow. Thanks for watching!